Welcome back, everybody, to the Unfounded podcast. My name is Christopher Turner, and I am your host. Thank you for joining me again here for another week of Take Me to Church. I think this is the seventh edition or seventh episode in the series, and I'm excited to get back to it. I actually, right after I finished last week's episode, I found myself kind of realizing that I didn't cover the second half of that chapter. I believe we're on chapter 12. Now, I'll have to double check here. Let's see. We were on chapter 12, I believe. Yes, the very beginning of the story of Abram. And it's a complicated story, and I kind of want to go in and take a little time this episode and break down the other half of that episode, or the rest of that, of that chapter, because I did miss a lot of it. We got a little bit sidetracked, but I liked kind of letting the show flow and going where it was going to go with Grok last time, because it really filled in some gaps for me and solidified some ideas that I had only been kind of mulling over intuitively. So I hope it was useful for you as well. And I think it was important context, information about the Canaanites, the peoples that populate these lands and how they relate to our current, our modern day context. I think that was really important to go through first. So, but that being said, like I said, we need to cover the rest of chapter 12 because it is a little complicated and confusing, and I want to break it down a little bit. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. But before we get into that, I kind of want to just say hello for a second and wish you a Merry Christmas if you celebrate it, and tell you that I hope you had a good one, and fill you in kind of on what I've been doing. This last week actually has gone by very quickly, oddly enough, and I found myself thinking it was Friday today, as right before I was about to sit down and do this podcast, even though I know that I'm doing this on Saturdays now. So my internal clock and timeline is all jacked up right now. I couldn't get to bed last night. I was up super late. I don't know about you guys, but if you're experiencing those kind of things this week, just know that's kind of par for the course, at least for me. So you're not abnormal, at least in relation to me, but that's not necessarily the gauge of normal in this world. So I hope that makes you feel better. That being said, it was a relaxing Christmas for me. I spent it with my family here and just relaxed and watched movies and ate good food and enjoyed each other's company, which is really the point of the holiday. And before that, honestly, I was kind of stressed out before Christmas because, I don't have a lot of money right now. I'm kind of riding it at bare minimum so that I can put a lot of effort into my projects that don't necessarily bring me money yet, but I'm hoping going to someday, be able to support me at least at some point. But there is a process when you're making something of doing it because you enjoy it, and you have to have time to do that. And so one of the reasons I kind of have the lifestyle I do right now is because my priority isn't necessarily on stacking up cash, making a lot of money, because I know I can do that in a variety of different jobs. I have a college education, I have military history and background, so I know that I could get a regular job, but that's something that I've actually been guided not to do anymore, mainly because the universe kind of didn't give me another option, but also because I think they were trying to show me that wasn't where I needed to be spending a majority of my energy. And that's part of the problem with the modern working world, is it demands so much of your time. Not that it demands time, work's going to demand time of you, but that you don't have more control over how you allocate that time relative to your other projects, the important parts of life. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I've been really focusing on music specifically because it's something that I enjoy, and it's actually what I really, really, really want to do in the future. I just want to make music. And I have this one song I've been really mulling over. I talked about in last episode that I'm getting even closer on and putting in hours of work. Yesterday I think I was in front of the computer for 12 hours straight, almost, except for lunch. I did stop for lunch. But that kind of work is worth the time and the effort because you lose track of time. Those 12 hours felt like 2. I almost blinked and I didn't feel tired afterwards. And so similar to last week, because we're still on the same episode, the similar energy, I'm being guided to kind of talk about my experience with my projects and how I feel about doing this, how I feel about working on music, how it regenerates me in a way that I hadn't had in a long time until I found these creative outlets again, so that you as a listener, if you don't have that outlet, know that they exist. Because there is something that gets lost in this world about what makes you feel good, oddly enough. So, try things out, and make a conscious effort to say, I'm going to do this for this period of time, and it deserves my attention. And you're going to feel weird feelings if you haven't done this for a long time. You're going to feel like you're wasting time, unfortunately. It's kind of the byproduct of working so hard your whole life, or only focusing on one type of work, I guess. Is that when you start to do anything else, the kind of programming inside of you says, why aren't you working on the most important thing? And even if you're saying, well, this is the most important thing right now, it's almost like muscle memory. You've done this for so long that by default, you kind of internally know logically that you still value the standard type of work more than this thing you're doing right now. And especially while you're still searching, because you may not even be having fun yet. So you have to kind of tamp down this internal critic that says, you're lazy. Why are you doing this? This is such a waste of time. Why don't you get some real work done? And while life does have kind of things you have to do every day, chores essentially, to it, you as an adult, you know that I don't have to tell you about those things. You know you have to take care of those. I'm talking about the time that you have that you're not doing those things, where you can fit in something else, right? So make sure while you're doing that and you start to hear that critic, you don't let it discourage you. Keep searching, keep playing, essentially, right? Until you lose track of time. And it's a funny little feeling because it is very deja vu-like. One thing before you know it, you look up and the time is gone. And a smile creeps on your face and you get a little giggly because you realize, yeah, how did I forget that I like to do this? And whatever it is that makes you feel like that, right? That's one of your outlets. That's your thing. Even if you're not good at it yet, you'll know because you won't care, right? Even if you're a little self-conscious because maybe you're more insecure about other parts of your life, it can kind of block you from enjoying these little moments. Just let yourself recognize that not being good at something that you enjoy means it's only up from here, right? Wow. You mean, at worst, when I don't know what I'm doing, I'm giggling, having fun, and losing track of time, then that means every minute I put into this, I get more of that feeling, and it grows, almost exponentially. As I get more proficient, I get more proud of myself, and then I show that to the world in whatever way I feel comfortable, maybe little bits at a time, maybe small pieces, until before you know it, you're demonstrating who you are. The changed version, not because you intentionally went in there and tinkered about, but because you allowed yourself to flow, finally. That's a beautiful message to start us off today. So, let me get a drink here. We are on chapter 12. Of the Holy Bible. This is the King James Version for those of you just joining us. And if you are just joining us, I'd recommend that you go and start at any other part prior to this. Ideally, start at the first episode of the Take Me to Church, the first volume of the Take Me to Church episodes, because we are reading through the entire Bible in this series, and it's going to take us a very long time. As you can see, I'm taking 2 episodes, hour-long episodes, to explain one chapter that is just at a half page long. Right, so that's just how complicated these stories can be and how much depth pops out of these stories and how much attention they deserve from you, right? So I want you, if you're just joining us and you have the time, to go back and start at that first episode. Try to follow along, and I guarantee you it'll inform your knowledge better. It'll help you enjoy this episode whenever you do come back to it. So to refresh our memory, let's go ahead and reread chapter 12. We are on page 17, and this is Genesis 12, line 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh. And the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hayan on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. Excuse me. Had to clear my throat for a second. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, they shall say, This is his wife. And they will kill me, and they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, Thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. The princess also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses and men servants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to be my wife. Now therefore behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. And that is the end of chapter 12. So there we go. We got kind of caught back up there. I hope that you enjoyed the second reading back through, because it is kind of a complicated chapter. It starts out with Abraham kind of getting this message from God that we talked about last week, right? But then we got caught kind of in the part where it talks about he goes to the land of Canaan. And it was because I was trying to clarify, where is the land of Canaan? And we found out that the land of Canaan is kind of the modern day Holy Land. And this was all filled in by Grok. We're using AI to kind of help us fill in the gaps contextually, right? And it's really useful and interesting, actually. If you haven't started to use AI, I recommend it, because it is a new technology similar to the internet. It's a grand technology that is reshaping the world very, very quickly. And if you don't start teaching yourself how to use these things now, there's going to be a steep learning curve, right? And a big advantage to being at the top of that learning curve before other people, right? So start to educate yourself on these things, for sure. So that's kind of where we left off as we talked to Grok. But it talks about this part where Abram starts to walk through, kind of journey through the Holy Land. And he goes and and the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And this is an interesting part of the Bible, because if I'm not mistaken, this is a similar mountain, and it locates it here. He went unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in this land. So it's saying that the Canaanites were in this land at this time, so it was their place that they were living. But in that place, the Lord appeared to Abram, and this is where he speaks to Abram and says, hey, I'm going to give this land to you. This is land that I will give to you and your seed, so you and your generations. And then in response to this kind of very short passage, but this vision, or this divine vision that Abram has, he builds an altar in this place. Now, the place that he builds the altar, if I'm not mistaken, is a very similar place that other prophets and patriarchs of the faith, the Jewish faith specifically, and Christianity, are said to have spoken to God. Now, I might be wrong about that, but it is kind of an interesting little tidbit that I'll leave there, because I think we will be able to find more about that as we read on. But that's not the point of this episode today. And it says, and he removed thence into a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hion on the east. And so this is trying to give you a location geographically, right? And that's where he built the altar. Now, and I think the reason that he's doing that there, the Bible's doing this, is it's being specific, is because this is an important place, right? And where he builds the altar is another place where other prophets have visions and talk to God. So this is a holy place, right? And it says that there's a famine. So the next thing that happens, Abram keeps journeying with his tribe, his wife and his brother's son, and everybody that kind of sticks with them. And there's a famine that starts to happen. So he's wandering around, and I bet you they're getting hungry and they need water, things like that. And they get near Egypt. And so they realize they're going to have to go into Egypt because Egypt has these resources. And this is a very important foundational part of the Abrahamic story, right? Is this the reason that Abram is called Abram? I think, at least this is just my interpretation, we'll learn more as we move forward, is there's a change that happens that is so drastic that it deserves a name change, right? And you see this happen with other figures, I believe, in the Bible as well. But Abram goes from being Abram to Abraham after changing from this person that we're about to see, and we just read about in that last part of chapter 12, to the figure that goes so far that he almost sacrifices his own son to be obedient to the calling that he's receiving. Spoiler alert, he doesn't, right? But just to illustrate the level of faith that he's willing to demonstrate, he goes from being fearful that a Pharaoh, a man, will take his life. So he has zero faith that anything will protect him, right? At the beginning of this, it says, we come near to Egypt, and he said unto Sarah, his wife, behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. So he's like, look, babe, you're sexy. You're hot. Pharaoh's going to like you. So I think that's going to be an issue, because if he knows that you're my wife, he's not going to like me around. So he's going to do something bad with me. That's essentially what he's saying here, right? So he says, you're fair to look upon, right? And then it says, therefore it shall come to pass when Egyptians shall see thee, so not just Pharaoh, but all Egyptians, that they shall say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. So they're going to keep you and kind of do what they want with you, right? Horrifyingly, right? So his idea to get around this is he's going to have Sarai, who also has a name change to Sarah later for a similar reason that we'll find out about later on in the story here. He asks her, hey, will you pretend to be my sister? Because if you're my sister, then you can go and pretend that you're single, and Pharaoh's not going to get mad at me, and the other Egyptians aren't going to mess with Pharaoh's girl, right? So let's roll with this. And so that's what they go with, right? It says, say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. So kind of goes like he says. So they come into Egypt and they're all like, damn, right? And the princess also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. So it's not even Pharaoh, it's his daughter says, hey, she's really beautiful. And Pharaoh's like, yeah, you know, you're right. She is pretty beautiful. And I'm sure he's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm his sister. She's like, okay, so you're single? Come on. I'm going to treat you nice, right? You can be one of, I'm sure Pharaoh has many wives, but one of my wives, essentially, right? And which at this time is a big deal, right? Give me 1 second. Dixie wants to get out of the thing here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. My dog likes to go back and forth when I'm recording, so I have the door shut. And when she wants to get out, she lets us know by giving us a little knock on the door. So thankfully, I have help from my mom here. She let her out. But all right, so it's kind of a crazy little thing going on there, right? So it's going exactly like Abraham's saying. Everybody's thinking she's really good looking. She's beautiful, right? And Pharaoh makes her his wife, essentially, right? Brings her into the palace and starts treating her life like a concubine, essentially. And the next thing that happens, let's see, let me find my spot here again. So it says that Abraham actually gets treated really well because Pharaoh's like, dude, like your daughter or your sister is really beautiful. Thank you for bringing her here. And he says, and he entreated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses and manservants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. So the Pharaoh just starts showering Abram with gifts. So Abram is getting good things are happening to him. What you would think would be good things are happening to him for doing the wrong thing. Does that sound familiar to anybody that's listening right now? Because one of the things, and we're going to pause here for a second, that I find very frustrating about the modern world is it seems like people often, and you may have experienced this, I'm sure you have an example of it in your own life, usually professional life. The world isn't set up in a way like you would think, or like you'd like to teach your kids, as if good guys are going to be rewarded by the industry or the company or the structure that they're a part of. As a matter of fact, the world's a little more cutthroat than that. And you can learn this either an easy or a hard way, kind of by being the victim of that a couple of times and learning that you have to look out for it, or by kind of learning about it some other way and then trying to to enter the world in a more strategic way, right? And so what I learned the hard way, unfortunately. I was a very naive kid, and I got taken advantage of a lot, essentially. But specifically, because I didn't have a lot of self-confidence at the time, I didn't speak up for myself, and I wouldn't stand up for myself specifically in kind of competitive situations. Even though I was somewhat competitive and I knew that I was good at a large range of things, sometimes I would even limit myself so that I didn't have to have the conflict, right, with other people. And I realized that this was a kind of a limiting, I'm kind of realizing as I talk about it, because I haven't talked about this before out loud, I don't think. It's something that really limited me and kept me from realizing what I was good at. You know, so this is coming through kind of out of the blue for somebody that's listening, kind of a channeled message here. That the world can feel backwards because the world isn't ruled by, oh, wow, this is why I heard this. So I heard this throughout the week, and I forget where I heard it. It'll come to me here in a second, but somebody said, the reason the world looks backwards is because the world is ruled by Satan, by Lucifer. The physical world is the playground of Satan, right? And when I heard that, it's kind of harsh, you know, so sorry if there's no like shock alert beforehand, right? But something hit me as it rang really true when I heard that, because it's an idea that I've been playing with but haven't put words to yet. While the world is not just hell, don't get me wrong, I'm not describing it that way. There is a certain aspect to it. You see this in the kind of the story of Jesus in the desert when he's being tempted by Lucifer or Satan. That's one of the only parts in the New Testament where you actually see a depiction of Satan, and it's not a physical thing. It's something that happens in his head, right? Very interesting. Very, very interesting. But one of the things that also happens is a conversation, a dialogue between Jesus and Satan, this disembodied identity. And it seems to proclaim that it can give Jesus certain things, basically anything worldly, power, fame, riches, anything that he would want. Control over the entire world, essentially, is what Satan ends up offering Jesus, and he rejects it, right? This is an internal battle that goes on. And I think it's something in that story that kind of confirms what I was just saying earlier, that the physical world is kind of Satan's playground in that sense. There's some control over this physical place, this heavy place that we find ourselves in, that dark energies do have a certain amount of influence over, but it's a different kind of influence than the divine influence that we associate with God. Short-sighted is the best way I could put it. And it always has a catch, right? You can call it a deal with the devil, right? So if Jesus was to have accepted any of those offers, he most likely would have gotten, because he was already a very powerful figure, but he would have become a traditionally powerful and rich and popular figure, maybe avoided the tragedy of his passion, right? But then in doing that, what happens is the rest of humanity. So there's a huge catch that if Jesus didn't have the foresight to recognize, he could have very easily traded away the place he was in that moment, a desert, starving and thirsty, for everything he could ever want in the physical world. So that you can recognize this is true, and the Abrahamic story, this part of the Abram story is demonstrating that to you through a real example. Abram does something wrong. He hides. He tells Sarai, his wife, it's recognized, they're married under God, right? So it's a divinely recognized thing. That you're going to deny something divine. The covenant that I made with you, I'm going to break in a certain way right now by pretending that it doesn't exist anymore. And I expect you to do the same thing. Why? Because I'm so scared that I feel like I'm going to die. Breaking another covenant, the one that you are supposed to have with your Creator, trusting in the path that is laid before you, so that if it is your time to go, if you are supposed to not make it out of Egypt, then you're supposed to trust in that, right? That's the way that you should be viewing that in that moment. But Abram isn't there yet as an individual. He isn't awakened to that level yet, right? So he doesn't see that. And he tries to hide, he tries to run, and he does it in the way we just went through. And so he gets rewarded by the Pharaoh, who is the king of the earthly world, right, at that time, for the thing that he's pretending. And it's not like the Pharaoh knows, he's not doing it intentionally, he's not intentionally rewarding bad behavior, but because the Pharaoh doesn't know, because there's deception involved, something ungodly at play, influencing that decision, now Pharaoh is punished in a certain way. Why? Because while Abram broke a covenant, it doesn't break the covenant he made with Sarai. It's a divine one that is forever, right? Which is why it's so special. So that even if you pretend like it doesn't exist anymore, there is a divine punishment that is played out in exactly the way you need to recognize what you did was wrong, right? Because if God's not going to show you that by giving you a pot of gold, that's not how God works. That's how Satan. That's how Lucifer works. That's how the dark things work. They give you all these physical things because that's what they have control over. What God does is a certain type of higher level action. You usually see it depicted in the Old Testament as like cataclysms, right? Natural disasters, we'd probably call them modern day. But there's a level of action that's so much above and beyond anything that a Pharaoh could ever do or dream of doing, that then acts on Pharaoh, that humbles Pharaoh, right? It's kind of a precursor to the Moses story. And you'll find this all over the Bible, right? So that this is extremely complicated, this chapter is. That's why I wanted to pay it extra close attention here today. Because Pharaoh gets punished, right? And he calls in Abram and he says, hey, and it's like bad punishments. He has plagues, right? That start to happen all over Egypt. So that's affecting not only Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's people, because Pharaoh is the figurehead, the leader of the people, right? So if Pharaoh's doing something wrong, and it's to apparently one of God's chosen kind of emissaries, a new emissary, granted, but an emissary nonetheless, someone that God is directly speaking through, Abram, his wife, even though Abram has lied to get him into that situation, we are being demonstrated just how seriously God takes his covenants. He will make sure that it is upheld, on his end at least, right? Apologies for all the throat clearing. Something is kind of congesting my throat right now, so might be an energy, might just be something in the air here too, because the air has been kind of bad here in Phoenix recently. But so Pharaoh is punished with a plague, and he calls Abram back and he says, "What have you done? Why did you do this to me?" Right? And I don't know if God or who tells Pharaoh how he finds out that Sarai is actually Abram's wife. But he figures it out one way or the other, and in order to remedy the situation, he kind of casts both Abram and Sarai out again. And so there's this tension, relationship between at the very beginning of the Bible, between the patriarch of the Jewish people, the Israelites, who go on to become the Israelites, and the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, right? Which, as we talked about, we've postulated as we've gone through this show, very well could be the remnants, not necessarily the Pharaoh himself then would not have been an Atlantean. But there is kind of these theories that the pyramids themselves, at least the Great Pyramids, are much older than we think they are. Could date back to those cataclysms we've spoken about in previous episodes, Younger Dryas type theories. Great floods that are spoken about in the New Testament and Noah. That these blocks, these building techniques are so advanced that they seem to outpace even what ancient Egyptians could do. And a theory has risen that possibly the ancient Egyptians we read about, even the, I forget what they call them, the Old Kingdom rulers, right? The oldest Egyptian kings and pharaohs that date back thousands of years, that those predate or are actually younger than the pyramids themselves, and that essentially they were a civilization that found those places, those structures, after whatever cataclysm, and then settled there and tried to kind of rebuild civilization on those structures. And there is starting to appear to be evidence for this, because some of the surrounding pyramids that we used to think were older, that are less advanced, kind of precursors to the Great Pyramids, we are now learning are younger, which is fascinating, because that kind of confirms this idea that I was just speaking of. And it makes more sense if they're younger, that what happened is a very young civilization, or maybe one that had just survived a cataclysm or was starting after a cataclysm, found these grand structures it had forgotten how to build. And then in an attempt to try to relearn how to build those things, started to try to rebuild those things. So we have all of these other, much more rudimentary, much more easy to reproduce pyramids that do not last nearly as well, scattered all over Egypt. And again, it's only until recently that we've started to postulate that they could be younger pyramids, actually, instead of older. Historians would have told you, and I probably still will tell you, that they're older than the Great Pyramid, which from what I understand, carbon dating, those kind of things, is wrong. We could ask Grok here. Let's ask Grok about that. All right, so I asked Grok that question, paraphrased essentially, right? But can you tell me whether the Great Pyramids are the oldest of the pyramids? And he might have got confused here because he says, no, scientists have not recently discovered that the Great Pyramids are older than the oldest of the pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built by Pharaoh Khufu around 2550 BCE, is indeed one of the oldest and largest of the pyramids at Giza. But it is not the oldest pyramid in Egypt or the world. The Pyramid of Djoser, constructed earlier around 2630, 2610 BCE, is generally considered to be the oldest pyramid in Egypt. It is a step pyramid rather than the true pyramid shape seen at Giza. See, this is where I disagree with Grok, because he must not be finding what I was talking about, because the article that I recently read was talking about that specific pyramid that they call the oldest one, if you look at pictures or photographs of it, it's a much more rudimentary style pyramid, essentially built with small mud bricks, straw mud bricks, right? And because of that, it's partially fallen down, or it's starting to fall down a lot quicker than the Great Pyramids are, because the Great Pyramids are out of limestone and marble, I believe, right? So there's a huge difference in the size of these stones versus, we're talking hundreds of tons, I believe even thousands of tons sometimes, versus bricks that are big enough for one person to easily carry, right? So you have a big difference there in technology that's necessary to build. And like I just explained earlier, I think that might be not necessarily correct. But like I said last episode, AI is not always exactly on it, right? And we can do some deeper research into that. But also take what I said with a grain of salt, because I might be wrong about this. If you have any comments about the pyramids or dating of them, or any theories that you're interested in, leave them in the Spotify comments or any other podcast platform that you use, YouTube. Drop me a comment, get the conversation started, because I do plan on starting to include some of those comments in the show here at the end, so that we can kind of get you an opportunity to really be a part of the show, if that's something that you're interested in, right? So I do have some fans that are already engaging in that way, so I want to have a way to give back to them. But also, if you're interested in kind of having your ideas shared or be a part of the episode, the conversation, that's one way to do it. Just drop a comment, right? It helps support the episode as well, the podcast. So, that being said, we definitely went on a little bit of a tangent there, but there's a long lineage here, essentially, a big relationship between the Israelis, the Israelites, who are at one point enslaved in Egypt, right? And are the group that builds a lot, at least historically right now, from what we understand, a lot of the, structures that are so magnificent in Egypt, at least if we stick with this traditional history, right? So, what's interesting about that fundamentally, and the biggest takeaway before we move on to chapter 13, I think, is that Abram screws up. He's kind of a coward, I guess is the best way to put it. So in that, recognize the Bible is trying to show you that no human being's perfect. God is choosing to speak to and to make a covenant with that lasts generations perpetually through him. with someone that's that person, that will hide in that way, that would deny their own wife to save himself? Isn't that kind of a mind bender? Because that's not how we usually play up the hero in our head. At least modern stories, modern movies especially, don't seem to understand this. That the hero has to go through something to become the hero. And usually it's being a coward first. Usually it's being weak first. Usually it's feeling weak or less than or beat up or bullied or whatever version of it I have to say that resonates with you, right? You have to feel like nothing. You have to feel pain. You have to feel hurt, the hurt that other people feel in this world, so that you have a fire inside, right? So that you know how to fight. You have something that will not stop in the face of true evil, real adversity, right? It's built, which is partially why the story is so popular, why we love the hero's journey. It's not a masculine or a feminine thing. But you do have to go through something. And the part that we just read in Genesis 12 is Abram going through something with God and God teaching him a lesson. Hey, you made a mistake there. I'm going to show you just how wide-reaching your sin can reach, can spread. It can touch a Pharaoh. It can touch all of Egypt, right? Take the covenant I made with you seriously. Right? You can feel that conversation underlined in this. God is speaking very strongly. Look at what happens to the world when you lie. Not only do you suffer, or actually, as a matter of fact, you might benefit, but are you really benefiting because you watch everybody else degrade? People that are innocent. You made fools, right? So if you've been a victim of that, recognize that this is how God karma works, right? It's in this grand way where just because Pharaoh doesn't know doesn't mean there isn't ramifications. And it is on the soul of Abram that God places that. You may think that Pharaoh gets punished worse because there's a plague that hits him, but I don't think so. I think what Abram and his wife walk away with is nothing back into a desert that they came from after now having everything they could ever want, not being thirsty or hungry. Now they have to give that all up again, and it's all his fault. Abram. Again, that's not the character you see in the rest of the Bible. It's very interesting, isn't it? So we don't have to go into the secret teachings of all ages because, like we found out last week, they don't think that Abraham is important enough to talk about. So we're just going to leave that off to the side here while we're dealing with Abraham, unless we find something that's really interesting that we need to research. There's lots of terms in here that'll pop up again too, like Canaanite and stuff that we can go back to if we need to. But I want to stay on track here because we got through chapter 12 now. We're going to go on to chapter 13, see what this one's about, and then we'll let it take us where it will. So we are on Genesis 13:1. And Abram went out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. Now that's interesting. I want to pause there for a second. It's just line 3 of Genesis 13. So I just said something that might not be true, but we'll have to double check here. It sounds like they didn't leave with nothing because it just says right here, and Abram was very rich with cattle and silver and in gold. So, as a matter of fact, he doesn't lose everything. Ooh, and isn't that a deeper twist of the knife? And isn't that true? Isn't that how the world works? Whatever deal you make, right? I want to live, I'm so scared of Pharaoh that I'm going to pretend that my wife, who's super beautiful and anybody would, love to be with, I'm going to pretend that she's my sister and get out of this, right? You get rewarded for that because she is beautiful and Pharaoh's going to like that. And what's worse is when everything falls down and crumples down, and even your wife knows, everybody, your wife knows how much of a coward you were. You get to keep all that stuff. A lot of the things that Pharaoh gave you, he doesn't take it away. He just says, get out of here. What? So now it's a burden. And you may not think that, but this is probably going to ring more true to people, if you're listening to this, who may have a little bit of something in this world. If you're listening to this and you have what you're comfortable, or maybe you're very well off, maybe you're what you would consider wealthy. This may resonate a little deeper for you. Because I think as you gain more things, physical things in this world, there's nothing inherently bad with physical things, right? It's how we treat them, how we prioritize them, the deals we make to get those things. That's what makes those items carry a negative connotation to us individually. And the way it starts to carry a negative connotation is by raising it up to a position where it's more important than the things that are really important. Say like your wife, right? So, and what's worse about that is like that deal, you may think like, oh, Abram's making a certain deal with the devil there so that he can save his own life, and he gets paid in riches and gold and wealth essentially by the Pharaoh. And you may think that the catch is going to be he's not going to have all that still. That's not the catch. He still has all that. And it's almost like an incentive. It's a way that both kind of Lucifer, the figure of Satan, the devil you could call it, demons, right, and God work knowing that other people, they have a blind spot. Like God knows the way that the figure of Lucifer operates, right? So God would know that Lucifer isn't going to take away those things that attract you, the shiny things, because it keeps you close to him, right? And many of you that are listening to this might also know that the more things you accumulate, the harder they are to let go. This is the quality I'm speaking of. This is why, I think, right? It's a certain shiny kind of hypnosis that happens that actually starts to make you heavy, weigh you down, make you feel like you're attached to that job or that maybe side gig, whatever you're doing. If you do make a deal, a low-level deal at any point, it doesn't have to be like literally doing black magic to try to get what you want. What I'm saying is like talking in your head, like, God, I want this, just focusing on it, overly focusing on it, ignoring the important parts of your life, the important people, the things, not being who you actually are, but prioritizing that other thing. If you will get what you want. That's all you'll get. I think that's what's being said here. Right? There's a way in which Abram, because he's so important, actually gets let off the hook a little bit here. It sounded harsh, and it is a harsh story actually, but Abram seems to kind of get let off the hook somewhat here. Because he does. He comes away with cattle still and gold and kind of riches, and he still has his wife, Sarai. I don't know if he has his tribe yet still, but it sounds like he still does have that. And then he goes back to the place where he started. He goes back to the mountain he prayed on, where he spoke to God. Genesis 13, line 4. Unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went into Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. So Lot came with him again, and he has all his people that helped tend to the flock. And the land was not able to bear them, and they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite, dwelt then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked, and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Then Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. That's the end of chapter 13. All right, so kind of a short one. It's a journey, right? So what we see here is, kind of paused there, and we corrected how I ended chapter 12 there, right? Or the chapter 13 there, but no, chapter 12. But this is interesting. So there's a dynamic here with Lot, and remember, we got to remember Lot is, let me think here. So Lot is one of Abram's brother's son, right? So it's not Abram's son, because Abram doesn't have a kid yet, right? So this is an important figure, obviously, because he's a patriarch as well. He's his nephew, but he's still old enough to be a patriarch, right? So, hold on 1 second. Dixie's trying to get back in now too. She's trying to make up her mind here. I like to roll with the distractions here, guys, because one, it helps me enjoy the process more, like I was talking about last week, and lets you know that this is just it's more wholesome, I guess, right? To hear that I'm not just like coming from a podcast studio that's cost a bunch of money to make it look like it's something nice. I'm doing this from where I live, where I work, where I play, where I do everything, right? So that you can really feel who I am. And there's an authenticity in that, I hope. At least, I hope it's an authenticity, not a cheapness, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so Lot is another patriarch, and it sounds like there's a part in here that Abram and Lot, like most grown men do once they reach a certain age, there's a certain competitive nature, I think, that men have naturally. It's something that you would see represented in nature a lot. Like, we'll take like two stags, right? Or like two bull elk, especially in mating season. If they get around each other, they're basically gonna kill each other, right? And they do the horn jousting and all that kind of cool stuff. It's really fascinating, actually. But I think that human males do something similar, and you can kind of see it represented here, but it's very subtle again. It says that both Abram and Lot have all this cattle, and they have their tents and stuff. And it doesn't say Lot and Abram get into it. It says like Abram and Lot's people, like their herdmen, who are helping them, take care of their flocks. They get into a tiff. And it sounds like it's because, and I do want to research this real quick before we move any further. There's a Canaanite on one side, which is probably Abram's side. And there's a Perizzite, is the way it's spelled, Perizzit. So it's, which is interesting because it sounds like parasite, but it's Perizzite. I wonder if there's any relation we're going to read in that, because I would hope not. I hope that that's not where the term came from, referring to an entire group of people. But it is interesting that that's like one of the terms that sounds very similar to it. And if that's trying to talk about a certain type of derogatory attitude that either the writer of this, the writers had towards these people, or that the Canaanites had towards the Perizzites, right? If that's why that term came into existence. I don't know. I'm kind of riffing here intuitively. We'll see. Let's open Grok back up here and ask about that real quick. All right, so let's see how he does here. I have, hey Rock, can you tell me about the Perizzites, who they were in the Bible and their relation to the Canaanites? Because I want to know in context, like why are they fighting kind of is what I'm trying to figure out. See if I worded it right. It says the Perizzites are one of the groups of people mentioned in the Bible as inhabitants of the land of Canaan before the arrival of the Israelites. Okay, so this is in addition to the Canaanites, which is interesting. We're broadening our understanding of this very diverse land area in the world, right? Geographical area. Excuse me. Here's a detailed look at them and their relation to the Canaanites. So identity and location. The name Perizzites is thought to mean villagers. Oh, interesting. Okay. Or dwellers in open country. So essentially nomadic people, right? Indicating that they may have lived in unwalled villages or rural areas rather than in fortified cities. So they most likely traveled, right? Herders, maybe, right? Hunter-gatherers. They are often associated with the central and southern parts of Canaan, particularly around the areas south and southwest of Mount Carmel. Interesting. Biblical mentions. The Perizzites are listed among various Canaanite peoples that God promised to Abraham as part of the land that would be given to his descendants. It's very important. They are mentioned in several books of the Bible, including Genesis, Joshua, Judges, and Ezra. We just read the Genesis portion, right? Always in context where the land is described as being occupied by multiple tribes before Israel's conquest. Relation to Canaanites. The Perizzites are generally considered part of the broader Canaanite population. The Bible sometimes uses Canaanites to refer collectively to all the inhabitants of the land, including the Perizzites. So that makes more sense. So that's the general term, but this is how context gets lost historically, right? Is like this. You have Canaanites, we use one term and it might refer to a very specific group of people at one point, but then as it broadens out and we try to identify who lived here, we simplify, but we lose the actual truth in that. And this actually is a kind of a reverse perspective of what I was talking about true history looking like. It's a combination of everybody's perspective. This is a way to understand that truth in the reverse way, something like that, right? So yeah, the Bible sometimes uses Canaanites to refer collectively to all the inhabitants of the land, including the Perizzites. They're often listed alongside other tribes like the Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, indicating that they were part of the ethnic and cultural mosaic of Canaan. However, unlike some of these other groups, the Perizzites are not explicitly listed as descendants of Canaan in the genealogical tables of Genesis 10. Interesting, which has led to some speculation about their distinct origins. So they might, because they're more nomadic, it sounds like, that's what their name derives from, not from what it sounds like here, anything related to parasite, thankfully, as I was kind of talking about earlier. That they might not be genealogically native to that area, at least in the Bible's interpretation. It doesn't say that they are. Which is interesting also, like it speaks of there, that there are genealogical tables in the Bible, like in Genesis here 10 that we just went over earlier, that explain exactly who lived where and why, essentially. Okay, next section here, cultural and historical context. The Perizzites were one of the groups that the Israelites were commanded to drive out of the land according to biblical narratives. However, historical and archaeological evidence for the Perizzites specifically is sparse, and much of what we know comes from biblical texts. Their cultural practices would have been similar to other Canaanite groups, potentially involving polytheism, agriculture, and trade. Interactions in Israelites. The Perizzites are mentioned in conflicts with the Israelites, notably in the book of Judges, where they are subdued by the tribes of Judah and Simeon. And later in the narrative, they are among the groups that were not completely driven out, leading to intermarriage and cultural mingling, which was frowned upon by biblical law. Okay, so they were kind of like we read about last week. There was a lot of different things going on, but essentially some were integrated, some fought, some, like you would imagine. So it says, in summary, the Perizzites were a part of the Canaanite landscape, living alongside other groups in what would become the land promised to the Israelites. Their relationship to the Canaanites can be seen as both distinct and integrated, with the Perizzites being one of several peoples collectively referred to as Canaanites in some biblical context. So kind of could be here referring to them as, this is obviously not referring them to as the same people, though. This is very early on in the Bible, so this is when these were two separate tribes, right? Because these are two people, it says, that get in a fight that are from these two separate tribes. So let's look to, before we move on, because we are getting close here. We have finished that chapter, and I think we're going to wrap it up here close. Yeah, we're right at an hour now. I want to see if the Secret Teachings of All Ages has anything on the Perizzites. That'd be interesting. Maybe they have a different context about them, because it does say that they're polytheistic, so they might have something in here. Let's see here. P. I probably shouldn't say that fast in succession, should I? Let's see here. Where is it? There we go. And they are called the what now? I forgot already. Perizzites. Okay. No, I don't see anything on the Perizzites here either. Have we looked up Canaanites in here yet either? I'm going to look up the Canaanites real quick, just because I don't know if we actually did. I think we might have last week, but if not, just enjoy the music for this second. Again, I like to leave this in because it's a little relaxing, calming. Let's just chew on what we've been talking about here for a second. So, there's a lot on Christ. There's a ton on Christ here. Let me look for Cain, because maybe there's Cain in here too. That would be interesting. Nothing. Yeah, wow. And I don't know, it's interesting that I'm not getting anything out of this anymore, guys, because it was so, like, the first 3 or 4 episodes, that book had, like, so much context to offer us, but it's looking like this is part of the problem. Like I said, I went into a little bit more earlier last week, but if you just stick with one tradition, you go either or, you do have a huge blind spot. I'm not criticizing kind of the occult intentionally there, or Christianity, either or. I'm just trying to say that these things, the histories themselves, are really, really useful, as I hope that this episode or these series demonstrate, and informing each other's perspective. And because they've been separated, I think that's partially why we've lost some of our history, and maybe some of the magic of what it is to be the human being. That's what I think, at least. That's why I'm doing this. So we kind of have a context for who those people are now. So they get into a fight, right? And Abram, I think this might extend to Abram and Lot, because like I said, they're both patriarchs. I think they're kind of probably getting a little territorial, moving around. Lot's been with Abram for a long time now, all the way through Egypt and before then. So Abram's like, hey, look at all of this land here. And at this point, they're in modern day Holy Land. It looks like he looks to the left and it's Jordan, and he looks to the right and it is, let's see here. So it doesn't say the other one here. I'm sorry, I've lost that spot. I don't know where it says what the right side was, but it does say that the left was Jordan. And this is important because this is where Sodom and Gomorrah, which is coming up here soon too, is located, which is a very, very important part of the Bible as well. But Lot ends up journeying and living near Sodom and Gomorrah in this very, looks like, beautiful, fertile plain. And Abram, and it doesn't really say which one's better, it just says everything kind of looks great, everything's beautiful. And so Abram basically says, hey, look, I'm trying to offer an olive branch here and heal whatever division. Obviously, we can't be around each other very well. Everybody's getting into fights, everybody's disagreeing. So this is a lot of space. Like, we're just sitting around each other for no reason. Like, where do you want to go? And I'll go wherever you don't go. So there's the left, there's the right. Which one do you prefer? And Lot's like, that side looks pretty good over there. I'll go over there. And Abram's like, okay, I'll go over here. And so they split up, right? And so he builds another altar, though, because he has to relocate. And so at the very end of chapter 13, Abram builds he pitches his tent and he builds another altar. And so there's constant repeated stories, but one of the things that is being made very clear here is that there's a priority, and the altar is symbolic of this, but there's a priority with the deity or God, that relationship, that conversation that's going on, to maintain that no matter where you're going in the world. And the way that Abram is doing that, starting to do that, is by bringing that altar everywhere he goes, right? And I'm not sure about in chapter 12 if maybe he's not, while he starts to journey around, maybe that's part of the reason he strays, is because he isn't speaking to God in that way directly. He has that first kind of encounter that tells him to get up and get out, but maybe he's not exactly connected in yet, is what I'm kind of thinking. So he's still learning how to hear this conversation and how to trust the relationship. The whole denial of his wife and the Egyptian story goes on as a precursor to the Moses story and the plight of the Israelites, right? Exodus itself, a whole another section of the Bible. So there's some foreshadowing going on there, right? And then Abraham kind of gets somewhat punished, but not really, but somewhat, right? And I think partially why is because he's being developed. There is a certain amount of divine protection as well that's coming through here, it seems like, where God's made a promise to him and he's going to keep it, even if Abraham's not really leading up to it. He's being Abram right now. He's not lived up to Abraham yet. But he starts to with this next story. I'm just realizing right now as I speak about it. So he does make the right decision here, at least seemingly, and offers an olive branch, makes a separation, and brings the altar with him. So he's re-demonstrating to the Lord that I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to reprioritize things just because the scenery's changed. The rules haven't changed. And I realize that now. So that's where I'm going to leave it, I think, for today, with the Bible at least. We're getting there, right, with it. We're starting to get into more in the meat and potatoes of the Bible. And like I said, we are coming up to an important part, Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's another realization, smaller scale version of the flood story, right? A different type of cataclysm, though, and you will see repeats of this as we move forward. You'll see it with the plight of the Israelites out of Egypt, right? And the story of Passover. So I think that's enough to digest for today. Again, I'm trying to take these in smaller bites the last couple of weeks, because what I've found, at least, is they get to be a little bit overwhelming if I go too much longer than that. And the Bible tends to be that way. It's a lot to chew on. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Before I let you go, I do want to kind of take a second and go through a couple of the comments I've got on the last couple episodes that are at least the Take Me to Church episodes, so that I can actually act on what I was talking about earlier in the episode, and give a big thank you to those of you who have been communicating here on the show in the past as well, on past episodes and current ones. Thank you for your support. So one of them, let me pull up one here from, the first one here. So this is from Kira Albi. Hey, Kira, shout out to you. Thank you for being a listener and supporter, and thank you for being like one of the first commenters on Spotify, at least. If you guys are commenting on other platforms and I haven't caught it yet, just bear with me. I'm trying to get social media all handled and organized to where I can get notified quickly for all of the platforms. It's kind of complicated, but we're getting there. Easiest way is Spotify right now, or YouTube. So Kira Albi, shout out to you. She says, this is on the Take Me to Church Volume 1 episode, the very first episode. She said, when you said literally the first action we do as humans was to fuck up, I spit a bit of my everyday doze out. Also chuckled with you as you did about when Adam knew of his nakedness and was trying to hide from God. This was great to wake and begin my day to. Thank you, Chris. I love your passion for your mission. Thank you very much, Kira, again, for that. And I hope you're okay with me sharing that live here. It was a beautiful comment. I assume if you're commenting that is meant to be shared publicly. So, but thank you very much. And I agree with you. I will try to comment on your actual comments so that you have a response. But if I can get a verbal one here, like in the audio format, it'll be a little better. I thought that the human aspect in the very first episode, where I was identifying that human and man are different terms that the Bible is using, hasn't really popped up in the last couple, but it is something that I'm tracking with. So thank you again, Kira, for kind of reminding me of this here right now, because I keep on, as I'm trying to analyze deeper parts of the Bible, I keep on forgetting about the human aspect, that there's been a mixing that's gone on here. We talk about in the book of Enoch, and that is more relevant to those first couple of chapters. But I think as long as we keep it front of mind, or at least back of mind as we're reading through, there might be other key aspects. It seems like there will be other key aspects of these stories that make more sense as we move forward. There is a difference happening. And I think if nothing else, the simplest explanation is that once we separated from that first original creation and started the act of procreation, we became part of the process of creating, which other beings, which then makes us a different thing than what Adam and Eve were. Human, man, right? Man. So now that could be the difference, that now it speaks of us as children of men often. But I haven't seen human yet, actually. So I'm looking for the term human because it hasn't been used yet. And while it might not be that important, the actual term, because this is a story that's been translated many, many times. It'd probably be more relevant if we were reading it in Hebrew. But I do think that if we do find the word human, it'll be interesting in the Bible, because we'll have to compare and contrast that section of the book to Genesis here. Anyway, Kira, thank you very much for being a supporter, and thank you for dropping that comment. I'll talk to you here soon. Hopefully we hear from you again here soon. Let's see, here's another comment, and this is from user, it's a bunch of different numbers, so I'm not sure exactly who this is. It doesn't have a name or anything like that, but I wanted to shout you out as well. If you know who you are, the first three letters are UCS, and then it's a string of numbers. Thank you for being a supporter. You are one of the top commenters here on a lot of these episodes. I really want to thank you for sharing your thoughts here. One of the comments that you left here on, let's see, it was on volume 5 just a couple weeks ago. You said the Tower of Babel being a depiction of different cultures and languages. It was a question with a question mark at the end. And I thought this was a really good question, because this is one of the ways that I initially thought of the Tower of Babel. I believe it's been depicted this way before, especially like artistically, with a bunch of different cultures making up the different rings of the Tower of Babel, kind of leading up gradually to kind of this more unstable peak, right? Height, top floor, penthouse, whatever you want to call it, right? But what I started to realize as I read the Bible version of it, at least, is that the Bible is very specific, that this is a time when everybody speaks the same language. So there isn't different cultures. Then if everybody has the same language, there's one culture, right? Because a large part of the reason there is different culture at all is because we don't speak the same language, right? Not the only reason, I don't think, but one of the largest, most likely. And I would argue that the other reasons are more almost like passed down genetically, but not necessarily in the form of genetics themselves, some kind of genetic memory maybe, that then integrates in the process. But that the Tower of Babel is meant to be, in the Bible at least, a depiction of a uniformity, that before God decides to confound language, human beings are able to act more easily in the world because they're all aligned. There's no wall to get over in terms of communication. So that I take the Tower of Babel to represent kind of our ability to construct great things, physical things in the world too, but also just our ability to try to reach grand heights. And I think this is specifically part of the Bible that's meant to represent that kind of Atlantean society, right? The pyramids themselves, as I've postulated. These are towers of Babel that we still have evidence of, at least the pyramids, physical evidence of. That obviously those civilizations crumbled because we don't call ourselves Egyptians or Atlanteans. So that they were grand once, but not anymore. And that this kind of entails a toppling, the falling of the tower. And in that falling, as you can imagine it, if you want to view it kind of visually, each of these levels start to topple. Those people get separated. They fall in different places in the world, kind of metaphorically at least. And then practically, the physical separation creates a certain type of difference that over time we experience as cultural differences and language differences, barriers to our ability to construct that tower again. So what I take from that is that part of what happened in the garden was, with the apple, was there was a certain power that was granted to us that was never intended. And part of what the Tower of Babel story is meant to represent is one of God's attempts to show us, metaphorically at least, and through the Bible, why we're not supposed to have that power, that very specific, whatever that specific power is that the apple gave us. Consciousness, you could argue, right? Because we can build things that will reach so high that it can turn the world evil. If you place that in modern context, it'll send a chill down your spine. I'm gonna have to chew on that for the next week, at least. Anyway, and then same person, right? That same user, another comment here, the latest comment on last week's episode says, "I'm learning so much. Thank you for the insight." Thank you very much for being a supporter. And anybody else that comments in the future, as long as it's a reasonable amount, as it is right now, I will try to shout you out here. And if you do have your actual name on your Spotify, it'll show up with your real name, so I can shout you out that way. But if not, no worries. And I think that's all I got for you this week, guys. The last thing I want to say is I kind of covered Patreon a little bit last week, but I was in such a jumbled state when I was doing the announcements that I forgot to tell you the reason I was bringing up Patreon. And the reason I was bringing up Patreon is because I am starting to do early releases, 24-hour early access of the podcast, this show, for those of you who would like to become patrons of the show or would like to support the show in some way. It's another way that I'm trying to give you value for your support if you decide to support financially. So if that interests you, jump over on Patreon. I started last week. I launched it with early access, 24-hour early access. It'll keep going this week in future episodes. So if you would like to listen to the show just that much earlier, 24 hours earlier than everybody else, and you'd like to help support the show and gain access to all of my other content, which is still in the process of being uploaded and is coming shortly, but my entire library of content, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's hard to say, a patron over on Patreon. Anyway, with that being said, if you don't have the resources or you don't feel like doing that right now, no worries. That's why the show is free. That's why I make it that way, because it's intended to be something that anybody can access. In that way, it's kind of my gift to the world, or my way to give back, right? So I want to thank you for listening and supporting me in that process and journey, and I will be back on here at the very least next week with another episode of Take Me to Church. I want to send you a lot of love. Until next time, bye-bye.